Okay, folks, it's a nice crowd tonight. I hope you enjoy this talk. It's going to be, yeah. Before we get started, though, with Bob Nelson and Vern Guildhouse, Quaker Parakeet Society. I'm Janice Lang. For those of you who don't know, I'm the president of the Quaker Parakeet Society for this term, and we are just. I can't tell you how pleased we are to have these two people here to represent Quakers. It's wonderful. And we decided that Bob, we are presenting you with a lifetime membership in the Quaker Parakeet Society. So here it is.
That's very nice. Thank you.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. So you just. Oh, Bob, you have to come back. It's a photo op. Okay? It's like,
Photo.
you ought to get someone more photogenic than me, though, here. Over this way.
Over this way.
Yeah. Let me ditch the Target bag. I had to hide it in something. Okay. Quaker. Ack, 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 ack.
What is this?
I don't know. Did you ever see the movie Mars Attacks, where they go ack, 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 ack? Okay.
Thank you so much, everyone. Well, here we go again. Could we have the lights down a little bit, maybe? Is that possible? Yeah, that looks better. Well, I first started with Quakers in 1971. I traded a pair of baby cockatiels that I was delivering to a pet store for a pair of normal green Quakers that had paired up naturally in a cage of wild caughts. The shop owner thought they should go to a breeding situation since they were wild anyway, and offered to trade. We were selling the weaned, hand-fed cockatiels at that point in time for $15 a piece wholesale. So I got my first pair of normal green wild-type Quakers for $30 in trade. Probably one of the best things that ever happened in my life. They went right to nest. I think there were 5 babies in the first clutch, and we were hooked. There is nothing on the face of this earth any cuter or any more fun than a baby Quaker. And it's obvious when you're hand feeding them that they get their Quaker name by the gyrations that those babies make when they're being fed. It is absolutely hilarious. And they have the little fat, fleshy, David calls them duck beaks. And they are absolutely precious. My mom was in love with them. I was in love with them. And when David came to work with me, he fell in the same boat. Even though we had many other species at the time, the Quakers were really the favorites. One day I was looking through one of the parakeet books, and there was a picture of, a wild type green and a blue Quaker. It was one of the TFH parakeet books. And I said to David, I'm going to have blue Quakers. I was too poor to afford blue ringnecks when they came in and were popular. So I'm going to have blue Quakers. And he said, well, good luck with that, because he knew they were scarce. So I called my old buddy and mentor, David West, who lived in California, where, as you all know, Quakers are illegal. But that doesn't make much difference to some of the people further south, I guess, because he knew everything about every mutation on the face of the earth, I think. And I said, I want blue Quakers. Can you find some for me? And he said, well, I don't know. I'll give you a couple names. And I checked with them. And they said, no. Fish and Wildlife has been on a witch hunt down here. And since they're so valuable now, we've panicked and sent them out of state because we didn't want to lose the money. If they get them, they'll euthanize them on the site. So I kept shopping around, couldn't find any. I called Bernie Rohr in Phoenix, a legendary aviculturist. I never met the man, but I talked to him for hours on the phone over the years. I said, David said that you might have blue Quakers. And he said, oh yeah, as a matter of fact, I said to my daughter just a few minutes ago, was that one of our blue Quakers that just flew over? He had a reputation for raising more birds at liberty than he did in the cages. And he fed them so well, they all came home to eat. It was really, I wish I could have gone to visit him and actually meet him in person, but I felt like I knew him from what everyone told me and our lengthy phone conversations. Anyway, I went back to David then and I said, no luck, surely. You know where I can find blue Quakers. You know everything, come on. And he said, well, check with Tom Ireland in Florida. So I called Tom and he said, well, your timing is perfect because I'm cutting back on my collection. I have some health issues. I have 2 pair of blue Quakers and they're going on the first list. I said, how much? He said, $2,500 a pair. And I'll be honest with you, they're small, they're just puny little birds. I think I told about this morning. They came in, they weren't much bigger than English budgies, so we outcrossed them. And I still laugh every time I think of David's reaction. Oh my God, they've bred the quake right out of them. But it didn't take us long to get it back. And by breeding the 2 splits together from the various unrelated pairs, because we did have good wild-caught stock to outcross to, it didn't take us long to build them back up. This is one of the first 2 pairs that we got from Tom Ireland. And you can see by the size of the wire mesh how small they actually were in comparison to the birds we have now. These are the first baby blue and green sibling that we raised from 2 green birds that were split to blue that we had outcrossed to. And now in 1993, the late Jim Chow was able to bring some what we called cinnamons then. They've now reclassified as pallids. And these are the first 2 babies. And that's kind of an interesting story. Jim found them in Europe for us. They were very expensive. They showed him a pair of birds in a big aviary with a bunch of visual offspring that were supposed to be, or visual birds that were supposed to be their offspring. Well, that pair of birds produced 50 babies. It was supposed to be a visual and a split, and we didn't get a single visual offspring. However, when we first had them in quarantine, sorry about that, Carol. When we first had them in quarantine, they had been through quite a bit, so I gave them an extended photo period, and the hens started laying in the seed dish. So David put the first 2 eggs in the incubator. We got a nest box on immediately, of course. And I said, it won't do any good to put the eggs in the nest box. He said, well, I'll put them in the incubator. They were both fertile. One hatched. It was a blue male, and since it had a visual cinnamon, now pallid mother, it was split, and it was the father of these two babies. We had $60,000 tied up in that shipment of birds, and it was a last-minute shuffle to get them into the country because of the way the USDA and Fish and Wildlife messed around with the permit process. I think they were trying to keep us from bringing them in because we got them into quarantine the very last day that it was possible, and because they stalled on issuing the permit. When they came in at the last minute like that, they were imported in Jim's name instead of in my name, and they should have been imported in my name with Jim as the broker. They went into quarantine. He called and said, I think I work a miracle. They made it in. The courier is on his way to San Ysidro with the birds. So we made it, and I'm very happy. Well, time went on. They were supposed to clear quarantine the day after Thanksgiving. So I sent David on vacation to Washington early, and I got a call from Jim the day before Thanksgiving, and immediately I knew something was wrong. I said, what's wrong? He said, well, the birds are okay, but we've got a problem. Fish and Wildlife has discovered those birds. They came in my name instead of yours, and they're threatening to seize them and to populate them. So you need to call the agent and see if you can explain it to him. I tried, and they really don't want to listen. I said, you bet I will. He said, oh, just a minute. If you've ever sucked up in your life, now is the time to do it. Don't even have an edge on your voice, because they have it within their power to seize those birds and kill them, and there's nothing we can do about it. So I called. The agent wasn't there. I said, well, this is an emergency. May I speak with someone? And the receptionist said, well, I can give you another agent, but I don't know what good it'll do. I said, well, I just need to talk to somebody. This really is an emergency. So she patched me to another agent. And I started telling him about it. He said, hold on. I don't know anything about this. We all have our own caseloads. And I said, well, they're supposed to clear quarantine on Friday. Will they seize them and kill them? He said, oh, no, they'll just flag them. You'll probably be able to talk your way out of this, but you've broken the law. I said, but it was just a glitch in the paperwork at the last minute. He said, you've broken the law. I mean, that's just the way they talk to you. So, you know, my heart's up in my throat. I'm about ready to cry. And I called Jim back, and he said, oh, that may be just the break we need. And I said, what do you mean, Jim? He said, well, the guy told you the truth. They all handle their own caseloads. So no one knows what the other one's doing. And I've brought so many birds in, the people in San Ysidro know me very well and trust me. If I tell them it was a glitch in the paperwork, which that's all it was, and it's been cleared up, which that's just a little white lie, they'll let me have them, and I'll get them out of the state. Then they'll be out of California Fish and Wildlife's jurisdiction. So we manipulated around, and that's exactly what happened. I had given the fellow I spoke with my phone number, And he called Monday morning, and I said, "Oh, I'm sorry to bother you. It was just a tempest in a teapot. My birds are beautiful." And he said, "What? You've got them?" And I said, "Oh, and they're lovely." Of course, I didn't have them yet, but they're lovely. And he said, "Well, we'll see about that." And he ended up fining Jim $300. But we got him out of the state, and there we have. That's how we got those birds in the country. It was just a glitch in the paperwork. We did everything legally. They were just trying to make life difficult for us in the end. Julie? This is one of the first cinnamon gray greens that we are now pallid gray green that we produced after we got the gray factor stock. And these are the first 3 gray factor birds that we raised. I was offered later a dark green bird that supposedly came from a wild flock in Florida. It came through a dealer, and there aren't too many dealers that I really believe through and through. So I really don't know where it came from or how many hands it passed through before it got to me. But I expected it to be codominant in its behavior, like the gray-green Indian ringnecks, and instead it proved to be recessive. So I crossed it with several different hens without having any results, and ended up mating back father and daughter and 2 half-siblings, 2 pair of half-siblings to get these youngsters. And it was funny there. I really thought that perhaps I'd paid all this money for a sport, which would be a bird that was just a one-time occurrence and it wouldn't reproduce. So when the first pair was fertile and produced youngsters, the oldest one was just a regular cinnamon green. There was a blue one, another couple normal green ones, and the tiny one had red eyes but white down. And I said, "Well, we got a cinnamon green and a cinnamon blue anyway. That's better than all normals." I pulled them a little young because I was so eager to see what we were going to get. So David was hand feeding them, and one day he said, "This bird looks different." And it was the little one with the white down, and I was doing something at the table, and I looked over my glasses. I said, "David, the older one is a cinnamon green, that's a cinnamon blue." He said, "I think it looks different." It's a cinnamon blue. So a few days later, same scenario. He said, "This bird looks different." I said, "I told you it's a cinnamon." By this time, I'm a little irritated with his persistence. Not long on patience at times. And so I get up and take the bird from him and go over to the patio door. You know, it's getting to the point where I don't trust my eyes all the time, so I wanted to see it in really good natural light. And I could see it wasn't blue. And I said, "Oh, this bird is different." And he said, "No, it's just a cinnamon blue." So he had the last laugh on that one. And then within 2 weeks, we had a gray from another clutch and a gray-green like the grandfather. So it proved that it was a recessive gene, and we were on our way to being able to do something with it. So that was kind of a relief. But he constantly reminds me of that scenario. Okay, Julie. And this is after we crossed it. The color isn't really all that great the way I took those pictures. The one on this side is a turquoise pallid, and the other one is just a normal blue pallid. or in the old days we would have called them cinnamons. The Europeans have reclassified them just to mess with our heads, I think. And this is what some people term a crossover. It's actually a pallid blue opaline now. I used the old terminology when I gave these pictures to Julie, and they're actually the terminology that is still on our website, because I haven't had the time or the ambition to contact the webmistress and give her the complete information. And also we have some other pictures to add. This is a very, very bad resolution of the first Lutino baby that we raised. Or at least from this angle, it doesn't look like a nice yellow like it's a beautiful butter yellow in real life. And this is a recessive Lutino. And these are those first three that you saw in the other picture when they were a bit younger. I just thought that was such a cute picture, I had to throw it in. And this is the first albino that we raised. I wasn't in a big hurry to raise the albinos. As soon as we got the Lutino, people kept saying, when are you going to raise an albino? When are you going to raise an albino? And I said, well, it's a new mutation. It needs to be outcrossed first before I cross it with another mutation. It needs to be built up instead of crossed with another mutation. So we bred the Lutinos out to wild types to increase the size and the vigor. And basically, I told several people, and they kind of shook their heads, if I just wanted to raise white birds, I'd have doves and pigeons. Okay, Julie. And this is the first dark-eyed turquoise opaline that we raised. The turquoise appeared out of our gray factor stock. It was interesting because it came from a blue split gray factor hen and a wild type green male that was split for blue, gray factor, pallid, and opaline. It was a big shock. I think it illustrates what happens when birds are closely inbred. We're told that many times, or all the time actually, a new mutation occurs as a result of a damaged chromosome. And various things can cause the damaged chromosomes, one of them being inbreeding. And I did some inbreeding with the gray factored birds. There was no way, when I had one common parent, there was no other way to do it. I tried to do it responsibly, but it was still inbreeding to a degree. And I think that's how we lucked out and got this bird. Now, Vern has the aqua mutation that he managed to import from Europe, and we're now going to experiment with crossing those two to see what the results are from that. And this was our first normal turquoise. You can see the green in there. It still is a blue series bird, but you can see the green appearing in there. And these are just three cuties. Blue, gray, and turquoise, in today's terminology, pallets. And this is our first gray opaline that we raised when he was pretty young. I just thought that was a cute picture. Another view so you can see the markings on the back, the opaline markings. It kind of frustrates me that we were misled by the Europeans. Dr. Scott Doak sent feather samples to the Matavi Institute, and we were told that he could definitively analyze with an electron microscope the feather barbules and determine exactly what mutation we were dealing with. So we thought that was the final word. So these were called pallets. Now they're saying, oh, that's all wrong. Now they're opalines. And I think they finally got it right, because I'm seeing the same variations in these that I saw in the budgies when I had a lot of budgies. I had a couple thousand budgies as a kid, and that's how I learned to work with genetics. There was a big budgie breeder in Silverton by the name of Bill Hanning, and he took me under his wing, told me how to do things, told me what to put with what, and then sometimes when I would come to pick up birds, he would have birds set aside to give me, and he'd say, okay, I want you to take these home with you, keep them together, and when they produce young, I want you to explain to me what it took to produce those. So that's the kind of mentoring I had, and I'm very thankful for that, because I learned hands-on. We didn't have all the books, but he had all the knowledge. I used to tell him he could take two sticks and put them together and come up with mutation sticks, I thought. I mean, he was really a master, and he was so generous with his knowledge and the way he imparted it to me. I'll be forever grateful. And David West is much the same way, only he was working with the larger birds. He was actually responsible for developing the original Lutino cockatiels in this country that came as spontaneous mutations from a pair of birds in Florida. He, an investor, bought the original stock from the late Mrs. Moon down there, and he had the knowledge to outcross them with good normal stock and build them up. And he raised a lot before he released them to the market. And the first ones were truly incredible. You didn't see the Lutino cockatiels. Of course, we called them albinos back then. You didn't see the bald-headed birds. They were fully feathered. They were wonderful because he was a master breeder. He knew how to do it right, and he wasn't so eager to make a fast buck. He took his time and did it properly. And that's what's important. Another view of the pallid gray. Gray and gray-green comparison. Of course, the gray-green is the primary. The gray is nothing more than a blue gray-green, if you want to break it down. That's a comparison of the pallid green and pallid gray-green. And that's a pallid gray-green. Now an opaline gray-green. But I told Julie to use both terminologies so I could hopefully confuse you as much as I've been confused in the last few months. And these are dark-eyed clears. These birds originally emanated out of the opaline stock that was originally bred in Florida. There's been a lot of turmoil over that. The original breeder insisted they were dark-eyed cinnamons. When I told him they weren't cinnamons, I became his enemy for life. I think they may be a form of pallid or of pied, actually, just clear pieds. But time will tell. Brenda has produced an incredible new bird from this stock. that actually has green pied markings, and we have some slides of that in here as well. A little group. I just love the cute babies. Another group. You can see here the difference, how much lighter the red-eyed Lutino is than the dark-eyed yellow. The dark-eyed birds are much richer in their coloration, and they're also much stronger birds. Anything with red eyes is naturally a little weaker. At least when I was in school, we were always taught that the albinistic birds, or albinistic animals of any kind, had a tendency to be a little weaker, to have vision problems, and just sort of inferior. Not completely inferior, but they had problems. And we're seeing this with the red-eyed Quakers, the light red-eyed Quakers. You'll notice that they're very sensitive to light. Sometimes they'll move their head from side to side like they're having trouble focusing. Rather like a newborn infant has time to focus when they're just a few days old. Okay, Julie. I just thought I'd throw these in because they were so beautiful. They're something that we used to raise. I still have some just to look at, but we're not breeding them anymore. They're so elegant in flight and so beautiful. But as a general rule, they don't make good pet birds. And in our American society, people want birds. I joke and say they want something they can maul and molest. They don't. The Europeans have a totally different attitude toward aviculture, and Dr. Heap will verify this, and Vern has seen it in Europe when he's over there. They're more inclined to have their birds in flights and aviaries and enjoy them as birds, not as handly, touchy-feely pets. But we've evolved to the hand-fed birds that we can handle and play with, and that's all well and good, but I still like to see birds in cages where they have room to fly and we can just appreciate their beauty. They can still be tame, they can still take food from you, they can give you kisses through the wire, but I don't think you need to handle and maul everything. But that's just my personal opinion. Okay, Julie. This is our first dark-eyed cream that we raised last year. And this was accomplished by combining the opaline gene with the dark-eyed white, or the clear white. And as far as we can tell, this was the very first one to be produced in the entire world. They have the creminos in Europe and have had for a few years. But as far as research has shown, we have the only dark-eyed cream in the world. Well, we have a second one now that came from our stock that a person bred in New York just this spring. There, I think there's a picture of that in here too. I believe I sent to Julie. Just another shot of him when he was a little older. And he's a nice big boy, and I gave him a gorgeous girlfriend. And I keep telling him, get with the program. But he knew he was special from the beginning. We told him enough. Now, yeah, this is the second dark-eyed cream. He's in the center there. And there's a funny story. You can see this yellow bird down here in the corner. That's a Lutino. The breeder's name is Mike Bartholomew. He lives on Long Island. And I was getting ready to send him another pair of birds, and the weather has been so incredibly topsy-turvy this year with the the extremes in temperature and the jockeying back and forth, we had a proven pair that laid 10 eggs and didn't bother to incubate. And I was talking about shipping to him, and I whine and complain a lot when things don't go my way. I'm told it's because I'm an only child, you know. But whatever. I was telling him about this, and he said, well, you're sending me those birds. Why don't you send those eggs? And I said, why? He said, well, I've got the incubator set up. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. I said, I don't know if she incubated them for the while. I thought she was incubating. Then I discovered she was off the nest most of the time. They're probably ruined. He said, well, we won't know that until we try it. Well, I was bumbling around and broke 4 of them when I was taking them. I'd put them on a shelf. So David fixed a foam rubber sandwich and made little holes in it, and we sent 6 eggs to him. He made a little compartment in the end of the shipping container. Well, a few days after Mike got the eggs, he called all excited, guess what? They're showing signs of development. And I'm going, I would never have believed this. I would never have believed this. Well, long story short, 5 of them died in the shell. 1 of them hatched, and it's that little Lutino. So he was right. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. And of course, it was pretty nice. It was a nice special Lutino instead of just a normal green or blue. Now these are Vern's special birds, and I'm going to turn this over to him and let him talk about his experiences in Europe and his birds.
Well, first of all, Bob has forgotten more about breeding and genetics than I will ever learn. And I'm pretty good at it, I think. But he also is a great mentor. Scott Doak was a friend of mine. Bob mentioned him earlier. And Scott introduced me to Bob. And from that day on, Bob's been mentoring. I live in Turkey, although I'm from Oklahoma. Our large breeding aviary is in Oklahoma. But when after meeting Scott and getting to know Bob, I said, what can I try to find in Europe that we don't have in the United States in the Quaker species? And the first thing that they sent me on a search for was the aquas. And so I went in search of aquas, and took me all the way from Russia to Great Britain, and finally discovered them. But where did I find them? I found them in Belgium, and the breeders were actually selling all of their stock to Saudi Arabia, all their aqua stock. And so, hook, line, and sinker, I finally convinced the breeder in Belgium, who bought all of his stock from Great Britain, from England, and I convinced him to sell me 2 birds. And so I finally tracked down the stock that they sent me on search for. But I also learned some things out of the Czech Republic in the process. I learned that they had a dark factor that was different from Bob's dark factor series. It appeared to be different. And so I don't speak Czech. I do speak Turkish. I can survive in a few other languages. But I was able to travel to the Czech Republic. Someone picked me up at the airport and drove me to the hills of yonder and took me to their breeding stables, and they were able to bring this nest of babies in. And there was you saw a picture of a dark green that Bob showed, and he showed you a picture of a dark gray. The birds looked exactly like that from my trained eye. And then there was also a bird that was gray but it was dusted in blue. And to make a long story short, I learned that the single factor was the pretty bird. The double factor was the slate dark gray, and the dark factor in the green wild type was looked just like Bob's dark factor green. Maybe a slight difference in darkness and color, but looked very similar. So I negotiated and worked on it and flew back to the Czech Republic a few times to develop a friendship in order to try to get my hands on one of these birds. But in the interim, I had developed this real good friendship with a Belgian breeder, whom was the guy I bought the two aquas from, and we talked about things that were happening with different species in the United States, different mutations in the United States in the Quakers, and when I was finally able to get my hands one trip on two of these birds, a dark green and the double factor, they weren't weaned yet. But I was told they were weaned. Anyway, in our pigeon communications, they were weaned. But what did I have to do? I could not take them anywhere. I got them across the border into Europe, but I had to do something with them because I didn't have the authority to import them into Turkey. And so I traveled all the way across Germany into Belgium, landed on the doorstep of my friend in Belgium, and I said, look what I have. And I said, I was told they eat on their own, but later on I learned that they almost lost these two birds because they weren't eating on their own. But the wife of my friend was a great hand feeder, and she was a stay-at-home mom and nurse. And so she took over and she raised my first two birds. They never did a thing for me. And so a few more trips back and forth to the Czech Republic, I was able to get my hands on a blue bird. I didn't need a blue bird, but this guy wanted to sell me a blue bird for some reason. And two single factor birds in my cobalt series. And so, similar situation. I actually picked those two birds up, not in the Czech Republic, those three birds up, not in the Czech Republic, but I flew into Dresden, Germany, and the guy drove to Dresden, Germany, and handed them off to me. And then I flew to Belgium until I could get the paperwork in order to export them to Turkey.
See, we really are both crazy.
Yeah. When you're passionate about something, passionate enough about something, and you know people who are passionate about something, they just make it work.
Kind of rubs off.
Yeah, And so the long and short of it is my two single factors bred beautifully. And they produce this color of single factor, double factor, and blues. And I actually have one of the single factors here with me, as well as an aqua and an opaline aqua. And so all of these birds were birds that I worked like a madman to try to get them imported into the United States, and ran into the proverbial Fish and Wildlife clerk, who the only answer that person knew is no. And because that person was saying no, you would go up the chain and you can refute it. And so I refuted it and was still getting no. Fortunately, I was at the time very, very, very good friends with the United States Ambassador to Turkey and his wife. And the ambassador said to me, he said, if you can get the CITES representative and authorities in Turkey to give you the appropriate export paperwork, I will make sure that I address with Fish and Wildlife, highest level people, what's necessary for you to get the birds imported. And so it's not in order to get this accomplished, you can't go through the process of following the chain. You have to work from the top down, and it's who you know, and it's luck is all it is. But we do have beautiful, beautiful single factors, double factor birds, Quakers in the Cobalt series here in the United States now, as well as 2 bloodlines of aquas in the United States that I was able to acquire at different parts of Europe. And so breeders in Europe, all of them, almost without exception, breed in large outside flight aviaries. They will have birds set up in mass flocks and let them pair up naturally, or they will have them in slightly smaller but still huge indoor-outdoor access flights where they will pair up just a pair, or they may have 4 birds, proven pairs in a large flight, and they don't have nest boxes per se, but they have sort of like deep apple baskets that they use in their aviaries. Anyway, from the breeders I have visited, that's what they look like, and they're also excited about our Quaker mutations in the States and would love to get their hands on some of them, but legally they're facing CITES issues as well. I understand that in southern Spain they got some of the opaline stock via Canada, but I haven't been able to confirm that. And so, but that's a little bit about how I was able to get some of my birds from overseas, these special mutations, into the States. I'm not a first breeder, but I have the first birds in the States.
We can hardly wait to see what we can do with them.
And they're fantastic, and I've been working with them. I have the 2nd generation now that's outcrossed with the opaline. I haven't gotten the new pallid, the former cinnamon, now pallid, to produce any visuals yet, but we're working toward that end. And I outcross and outcross and outcross, just as I did, Brenda, the dark-eyed yellows or clears before you or Bob or any of you were ever able to get them from me. And I hope you've had better luck with them than I have. Because I haven't gotten a white yet, but they have. And so.
Well, but this proves what happens when you can work together with people and cooperate and make things work. Vern has been wonderful to work with. Scott, oh, I'm sorry.
It's important.
This proves what happens when you can work together with people effectively. Scott Doak was good to work with, both of us, Dr. Scott Doak. Unfortunately, he had some serious family issues, health issues in his family, and he was forced to give up his flock of Quakers. But the 3 of us could work together. Now, Vern and I are working together, and we hope to get some other people that are seriously involved and dedicated enough to help us develop these things so that other people can enjoy them as much as we do. And as we continually cross these different mutations and different genes and introduce new genes, we're going to see still more things appear. But they have to be responsibly bred and outcrossed constantly to good, strong, wild type stock to keep from producing a bunch of inferior garbage. So that's what we're trying to do.
We want all of you who want our stock to come back to us and say, that was a great find. That was a great bird. And it worked well for me, and it continues to do well. That's what it's about from my perspective.
And mine as well.
And those things I've learned from Scott and from Bob. Mostly Bob, because Scott got out of breeding, and I actually bought his breeding stock. And so, that's all I have to say. I do have some beautiful birds. As soon as all the talking's done, they're breeders. I will uncover them, put them up here so you can come and look at them.
Okay, I have a few more personal slides. I told you this morning that I was going to give you a little insight into part of our private life that many people don't get to see, where we live and some of the other goofy things that we do in our lives. We just plain enjoy life, and I just thought it'd be fun to share some of it. This is a picture, the last picture we took of Vern's single factor bird when he had it at the house last week. I think it's gorgeous, and I can hardly wait to see what happens when we get to combine it with the other mutations. I have in my mind that eventually we'll have a Quaker that's almost pink. It'll be so orchid it's almost pink, like those Indian ringnecks. Well, you saw how that delicate Indian ringneck looked almost pink, the light cinnamon violet ringneck. I think we can achieve the same thing with these Quakers. It's just going to take a little patience. And
for Bob to live longer.
yeah, I was just going to say, and Vern may have to finish this project. Okay. Another group of babies. Just go on. They've seen enough Quakers. More Quakers. This is Brenda's special bird. See the dark green on it. Isn't that lovely? And the front view. And she tells us that the green is actually increasing since these photos were taken, which that means if it is a manifestation of the pied factor, it's going to be a progressive, which makes it even more exciting. Another view of the special kid. I think it's gorgeous. Now this is David. I think Claudia's here. I yelled at him to get out of bed about 5:30 or 6 one morning because I had to drive these birds down to deliver to Claudia in her bird shop. This is when we were still raising all large species. I think David was probably, that says 85, but I think it was probably 87 by the time that was taken. But he's not a morning person. He was half asleep. I like to tease him and tell him he looks like he was stoned. Okay. And that's another picture of David at another time. We had a gold-capped conure that was hatched with a birth defect. It had kind of a club foot. So David named it Captain Hook. And that peach-faced lovebird was his buddy. And the conure loved to lay on its back, and the lovebird would perch on the, on the disabled foot. So David called them Captain and Tennille. And Tennille liked to go outside. That was taken out on our deck. And she liked to fly outside. And she was so aggressive, we had a lot of hummingbirds because of the flowers, and she'd try to chase the hummingbirds. She was very territorial. And she was also very independent. There's a big cedar tree in the backyard, and she would go up in that cedar tree, and sometimes when we'd try to call her in at night, she wouldn't come down. She'd spend the night out. And she did that several times until one night she spent the night out once too often, and apparently an owl or another predator picked her off, and we didn't get to see her again. But she really was a delight, and when we had company, she was the life of the party. Okay. Now, you can see how I've taken my toll on David. That's him in the center. He had that nice dark red hair a few years ago, and now the gray is gone. This was taken on his 54th birthday party. The people on the left are our carving friends from Canada, and the people on the right are our wood carving instructor and his wife. We carve carousel animals as a hobby. And this is a picture of David and a carousel sea monster that he's carving for the carousel. The reason the head is white is because it already has the primer on it. These things are carved in sections. You can see the seams. The body is hollow. It's termed coffin-type construction. They're actually made from basswood lumber, which, with good Swiss steel tools, almost carves like butter, but it's a very durable wood. And when they're finished, we carve them in sections because they're easier to handle. And then when they're finished, they're doweled and glued together and clamped, blended and sanded, and then the primer coat put on the whole thing, and the final paint goes on. So actually, we've got a whole group down there that are in their 3rd and 4th childhood. We've just never grown up. And we find that carousels bring out the little kid in everybody. You know, there are a couple new machines. There's one in Salem. That was a community project there, and I've been there a couple times when they would bring seniors in from one of the care centers or something on an outing. And it's really heartwarming to see some of these older people that have to be helped up on the animal. When the machine starts, their face lights up. It takes them back to their childhood. They're a lot of fun. They really are. And this is an antique animal that I have in my living room on occasion. I haven't painted it yet, and I've only had it since 1977. But this young blue front, when we'd let him out, and it's one that Claudia eventually got. When we'd let him out, he'd fly and sat on that carousel horse. He loved that carousel horse. And that's one of our little black-headed caiques. He liked that stuffed walrus that I had sitting on the floor in the kitchen for the neighbor kids to play with. And as many of you know, I was the first one to breed the Cape parrots in the United States. And this is a rather poor picture because it was digitized from an old Polaroid print. But I was pretty proud of those kids. They were the first captive-bred capes in the United States. And that's a young orange-wing Amazon. I took that picture in a motel on the way down to deliver it to Claudia one time. And this is just an assorted group of funny little conures. Those slender bills are among the most delightful little characters. They're noisy, they drive you crazy with their noise, but they're so incredibly intelligent. The ones that we kept to an older age, very quickly learned to get out of the cages. They're escape artists. When David was feeding them, he liked it because with those beaks, they would tip so far back, it was like they were going to fall over backward. And if he fed one and one of the others was anxious, they squealed like little pigs. They're really, really funny birds. And of course, the others are Nandays. And that's our pet center, actually, David, Fred. Fred's quite a character. Senegals make wonderful pets. That's one of our pet cockatoos. Frosty liked everybody. And this cockatoo, we eventually came to own this bird, and it became a successful breeder, which really explodes the theory that pet birds are no good for breeders. Because when this picture was taken, he belonged to a young couple in their early 20s, and the husband was doing some carpenter work for me. And this bird was so imprinted with the husband, actually the wife was very jealous. It was really kind of funny. I felt sad about it. And he'd bring him to work with him, and the bird carried the toothbrush to play with. And one day I looked out, and here he had the toothbrush scratching his head with it. So I grabbed the camera and snapped this picture. And again, that's an old Polaroid that was digitized, but I just think that's such a cute picture. And later on, when they had their first child, the wife used the excuse that she was afraid the bird would bite the baby, and I'm sure it would not have, but she made him get rid of the bird. He sold it to someone else who put it with a mate, and they just didn't seem to bond. The fellow that had them had to move to Alaska, so he sold them to a pet shop. And every time we'd go in, that little bird would hang on the wire like, oh, get me out of here, you know. So I didn't want a pair of cockatoos. I didn't think he would make a good breeder. So a friend of ours bought him. They had him in a cage in their dining room. They bonded, went to nest, hatched a baby, but they nipped the first joint off the wing. And without bringing the bird to us, they took it to the lady in the pet shop where they had got the birds, and she fed it. Well, they went and sold it for them. They went back to nest again, and she told them that, well, you need to talk to Bob and David, because I'm not doing a cockatoo from day one anymore, and David does it regularly. So for a while, David would go get the eggs when they were laid, incubate them, and raise the babies, and then we would market them for her and give her half, which everybody was agreeable with that. Then she developed an allergy to the cockatoos, so David eventually bought that pair of cockatoos from him. He was so well bonded to that hen that she got caught up in a toy and got all stressed, and we lost her. And he was so devoted to her, he just literally pined away. It was very, very sad. I didn't think a pet bird like that would ever bond with a mate to that degree. It was very interesting, very educational to me anyway. Now this is a Malaysian longtail. The bird didn't belong to me. This was taken in the aviaries of a friend of mine in Sacramento. They're very rare in this country. I don't know that anybody's ever breeding them anymore. He eventually lost his start of them. I don't believe he even has this bird anymore. This was the last specimen that he had. They're very difficult to maintain in captivity. And when they came in, they weren't colored up, and some of them looked like they were a little brighter in color. So they were sold as pairs, and a lot of them ended up just being pairs of females. So there were very few of them bred, and they were just difficult to maintain and keep alive. And these are some of our children. I think Claudia probably ended up with them. The little Citroen crest is an offspring of the fellow with the toothbrush. And this is a dusky lory. We raised a lot of dusky lories for a while. Beautiful. I love that autumn phase, and they're so much fun to hand feed, but not as much fun as Quakers. That's either the same bird when he was older or another one. I'm not really sure. It's been so long. And this is another, this is kind of a mixed group. You can see some of our baby finches that we hand fed and some cockatiels. Finches are fun to hand feed. And these are Vinacious Amazons. One of my favorite species, but also one of the noisiest on the face of the earth. The interesting thing is, when I got the wild-caught birds, they were very quiet. And most Amazons, as you other breeders know, when they come into breeding condition, become very aggressive. The males will be very aggressive when the hen's incubating. And the wild Vinacious, the male would act very nervous and fly back and forth in the flight like he was trying to distract me away from the nest. There were no signs of aggression. I found that very interesting. But once the domestic babies were raised, they would scream to curdle your blood. I mean, but they are incredibly beautiful. They're great talkers. They even have a sense of humor. I had one that would pick my pocket if I happened to get close enough to the cage. It would pull my handkerchief out of my pocket and then giggle, drop it to the floor and giggle. So they're incredible birds. They really are. I don't know if Nancy's here or not. She raised quite a few of them. And she loved them too, but I think she finally decided that they were a little too noisy for her as well. And this is a satisfied customer. We didn't sell too many directly to the customers, but these people found our name and came begging, and it just happened that we were feeding some baby cockatoos. So David said, "All right, I'll wean one for you." And this was the night they came to pick it up. And we were told that the cockatoo followed the kid everywhere and had a pillow it sat on while she played with her dolls, and would sit and watch her while she played with her dolls and whatnot. So they do make wonderful pets. And this is my little neighbor boy and one of my baby blue and golds. This photograph was actually on the cover of American Cage Bird magazine. I believe it was in 1974. Mrs. Gloucester was a friend because I'd written for her for a while. And she asked for an article on the macaws, and I sent her the article and some pictures, and she told me when she was going to publish it, the next issue. And she called and she said, "Bob, do you mind if I hold that issue or hold that article for another issue? I already have the covers printed for 2 issues ahead, and that picture has to go on the cover." So she held it back, and that little kid was so proud to have his picture on the cover of a magazine. It was really precious. He was 3 at the time. And this is a baby red-headed finch that we hand-fed. I love the redheads. They would throw their eggs out of the nest, so I fostered some eggs under a society finch. One of them hatched, and we hand-fed it. The societies fed it for a while, and then we moved it to hand-feed. I was fascinated by this feeding pattern. in the beak. And as the bird matured, the white lines shrink away and they disappear just like the dots on the various Australian finches do. And this is Pete, our Handicap Society finch that I've babbled about endlessly over the years. He was kicked from the nest when I was in the hospital. David rescued him and hand-fed him. And he literally ruled the house. Don't tell me that finches are not intelligent and know how to get their own way. They're highly underrated. A tame finch is wonderful beyond belief. You have to experience it to really realize how wonderful they can be. He interacted with everybody. He helped hand feed. When we were taking pictures, he helped, as you can see. It was as though he had to be in the middle of everything. But you can see the deformity. He was hatched without a foot on one leg. And when you saw him in real life, that foot looked like a miniature hoof. It was just rolled over. He didn't know he had a problem. He thought he was perfectly normal. What an incredible little bird. He was the light of my life for quite a number of years. And he loved to bug David. David didn't like him pulling his hair. He flew to David's shoulder there, and I called Pete, and he turned around and looked at me. Go ahead. There he is with a mouthful of David's hair. And his routine with that was to get a mouthful of hair, fly out as far as he could, circle David's head until he got to the top, and then he'd try to tuck it in like he was building a nest. I only wish we'd had a video camera back in those days. And this is Trouble. He was a zebra finch that we fed. In fact, we had two of them. We called them Trouble and Sam. We called this one Trouble because he was always into something. And he loved this reindeer at Christmas time. A friend made that for me to hang on the wall. And he loved to sit between the horns. But he was such a troublemaker, we ended up giving him and his mate to some friends that fell in love with him. And he loved them too. I have several hanging lamps in the house. And they kept trying to build nests in the hanging lamps, and I was afraid that we'd forget to check them out and they'd start a fire or something. So they lived happily in another home, and we got to see them, and they still seem to remember us when we would go to visit. So the intelligence of these smaller birds is highly underrated. And here is Mr. Pete inspecting. Everything had to be just right. And he wanted to be where the action was. I was taking pictures of the Vinacious, and there he comes flying into the frame. And there he is. Jay, I think he was probably fascinated with the macaw's tongue, but he was totally fearless. It was nothing for him to perch on a baby macaw's back. And this is just another group of some of our precious kids. We loved them all, and we were kind of careful where they went. Claudia was one of our favorite recipients, and she told us one time she'd take David's babies anytime because he did such a good job with them, because he did all the hand feeding. And this is an interesting example of a Vosmaria eclectus, and you wouldn't call it eclipse plumage, it's immature plumage, and it molts out. Now, it occurs from time to time, and when people pull them for hand feeding, they often say, oh, it's an imbalance in the hand feeding formula. I can attest to the fact that that simply is not true. because my friend Fern Hubble down in San Diego had a pair that were parent-fed fledged one time when I was down there. They were both females. One looked like any other Eclectus female, and the other one looked exactly like that. And they were parent-fed. So that tells me it's just something that occurs in the species from time to time. And, you know, we have a tendency to blame the hand feeding. If something goes wrong, oh, it's the hand feeding formula. Not always true. And another cute Citroen Cockatoo. I love them. And the Major Mitchell family. I won't go into that. I'm trying not to get my emotions on my cuff tonight, but in '84, September 10th, 1984, somebody darted the watchdog, walked within 10 feet of my dad's bedroom window. I still had aviaries at the other end of the ranch from where my home is now. And they got my gang cockatoos, which Velma Hart had raised and given to me as a gift. A pair of hyacinth macaws that I had gotten from Fern Hubble before she passed away, and several other birds. There was no trace of them. Local law enforcement wasn't even interested. It was just some old birds. I told them next time I need help out here, I'll call and say Nelson on Fat Oaks growing dope, and I'll have all kinds of help. And a couple dear little linealateds. We had a lot of fun with those for a while. But you can't have everything, you know. And this was taken in the meadow below our house, out of David's bedroom window. This was taken from our back porch. You can see how our climate varies even that close to the coast. This was taken early in the morning. I was in Portland when David took this picture. By the time I got home in the evening, it was all gone. So it doesn't last long as a general rule. Okay, this is one of our native pets. This was taken in the carport. I saw her, looked out the front door and saw her eating out of the waste bucket in the back of our Polaris ATV. I hollered at her, and she turned around and looked at me, and then went right back to eating. Go ahead. And Willie Nelson stopped by, and I put him to work one time. David was clowning around fixing a pad for a pergola that I'd bought for the yard, and we put a raised bed along that fence later. He's going to kill me when he finds out I showed this, but it's literally, it's gone all over the world. I've sent it to Australia and everything. And he did a pretty good job, because this is what it looked like when it was finished. We still hadn't put the raised bed in yet, and it's still kind of junky. This is more the way it looks now, although we've made a lot of improvements since then. You can see the terrain around our house. We live in a private valley. Vern can attest how private, and he thought it was heavenly. Either that or he lies pretty good. And David poured this curved sidewalk in one day, 3,400 pounds. But I helped. I held the hose. So we enjoy gardening. We enjoy our solitude, and birds and flowers go very well together. It's fun to live where we live. It really is. Another view. I think David said he laid on his belly to take this one to get. I was working over there. I even had a hat on my old bald head. And this is a very special clematis we had last year. We're running out of time, right, Carol? Go ahead. And this is our insect control specialist. He takes care of the bugs. And this is a not yet completed suspended flight that we started to install on this aviary in the backyard. Then with the weather patterns and the breeding season being so upset, I got a little bit paranoid and decided to set some birds up for breeding in there, so we had to stop our construction because we didn't want to disturb them. Normally that aviary is just for holding, oh God. Quick, get that off of there. How did that get on there? Good. I think that's about the end of it. No, no. A few years ago, hey. Thank you so much for your patience.